Brayden Oakes hadn't even finished his first sip of bitter black coffee when a woman in heels that probably cost more than his rent stopped beside his tiny table and said, "Every seat's taken." "Mind if I sit here?" He glanced up from the mess of bills he was pretending not to stress over and looked at her. Gorgeous, classy, way out of place in this downtown coffee shop where chipped mugs and second-hand furniture were part of the charm. She didn't belong here, not with her sleek blazer, tailored pants, and hair that looked like it had been professionally blown out 10 minutes ago. Brayden gestured to the opposite seat. "Be my guest." She sat without hesitation, crossing one leg over the other, her bag a structured leather designer purse resting in her lap like it had its own personality. He tried not to stare. She probably drank lattes with oat milk and knew what words like portfolio diversification meant. He sipped his coffee. It was lukewarm already. "Of course." "Rough morning?" she asked, nodding toward the paper in front of him. The red final notice stamp practically screamed from the top of the page. Brayden folded the paper and shoved it back into his bag. "Something like that." She didn't blink. "Same." He raised a brow at that. "You don't look like someone who has rough mornings." She gave a small laugh, not the fake kind, but one that made her eyes crinkle just a little. "Looks can lie." He didn't know what made him ask next, maybe because he hadn't had a real conversation with a grown adult since his ex left 2 years ago, or maybe because she didn't look away from him the way most people did when they noticed the old sneakers, the fraying jacket, the exhaustion in his eyes. "What's your name, Lyla?" she answered easily. "Lyla Monroe." "Brayden," he replied. "Brayden Oakes," she smiled. "Nice to meet you, Brayden." They sat like that for a moment, sipping their drinks in silence. The shop was buzzing with noise espresso machines, laughter, clinking cups, but somehow their little corner felt still. Then a soft voice cut through the air. "Daddy." Brayden turned just in time to catch a blur of pink barreling toward him. Willow, 5 years old, cheeks flushed from the cold morning, arms out like a little airplane. He bent to scoop her up into his lap, kissing the top of her head. "Hey, Peanut. You have fun with Miss Carla," Willow nodded, her curls bouncing. "We made glitter snowflakes." Brayden glanced apologetically at Lyla. "Sorry, my daughter. She's not usually this." "She's adorable," Lyla said, eyes softening as she looked at Willow. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm Lyla." Willow tilted her head like she was sizing her up. "You're pretty." Lyla laughed. "Thank you, so are you." Brayden felt something strange stir in his chest. He hadn't expected this morning to be anything other than a reminder of everything going wrong. The eviction notice, the hours he'd lost at the garage, the daycare costs that kept piling up. But this woman, this stranger, was looking at him and Willow like they weren't broken. Like they weren't temporary. Lyla stood after a few moments, dusting off her coat. "I should go." Brayden nodded, suddenly not ready for her to leave. "Thanks for sitting." She smiled, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. "Thanks for sharing your table." He watched her walk out, heels clicking against the tile, completely unaware that she'd left behind a card neatly tucked under his coffee cup. Lyla Monroe. No title, no company. Just her name and a number. Brayden turned it over, confused. He didn't know that name, but something about it tugged at the back of his mind. Later that night, after Willow was asleep and the apartment was quiet, he sat on the couch staring at the card. It didn't make sense. Why would someone like her want to talk to someone like him? He didn't call her, but she came back. 2 days later, same coffee shop, same time. This time, she brought 2 pastries. "I figured you'd still be drinking that sad coffee," she said, placing one in front of him. He blinked. "You came back. You looked like someone who needed a second chance," she said casually, taking a seat again. Brayden didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "Thanks." And that's how it started. They met at that same table for days. Sometimes Willow was there, drawing quietly beside them. Sometimes it was just the two of them. Brayden learned she had a sharp sense of humor, a dry wit that made him laugh even on days when laughter felt impossible. She asked questions, real ones, about Willow, about his job at the auto shop, about how he managed everything on his own. But she never talked about herself. Not really. She said she worked in finance. That was it. Brayden didn't push. He was used to being the one people passed by, not the one someone like her kept showing up for. One morning after Lyla had helped Willow pick out a muffin, Brayden watched her and asked, "Why do you keep coming here?" She shrugged. "Maybe I like the coffee." He gave her a look. "Okay," she said, lips curving. "Maybe I like the company more." His chest did that strange twist again. They didn't kiss, not yet. But when she leaned across the table that morning and brushed a crumb from his cheek, her fingers lingered a little too long, and Brayden realized something terrifying. He was starting to fall for her, and he had no idea who she really was. "Are you always this quiet when someone buys you a kwass?" Lyla's voice pulled Brayden out of his thoughts as he stood beside her in the bookstore a block from the coffee shop. She loosely held a hardcover novel in one hand, its cover bright and floral, completely at odds with the storm brewing inside his mind. He hadn't expected her to suggest walking with her after coffee. He definitely hadn't expected to say yes. "I'm not used to surprises," he said, running a hand along a worn row of spines. "Especially the nice kind. You'll have to get used to it," she replied, tilting her head as she read the book jacket. "I have a habit of doing unexpected things." He watched her for a beat. She didn't seem to be trying to impress him. She didn't seem to be trying at all. And that made it even more dangerous, because he was starting to wonder if this wasn't just coincidence anymore. "You have a favorite author?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "I don't really read much," Brayden admitted. "Most of my spare time is spent fixing things that break, or trying to keep Willow from gluing macaroni to the walls." "You know," she said, turning toward him, "you're allowed to have things that are just yours. Even if they're small." He let out a low exhale. "That hasn't really been an option." Lyla nodded once, like she understood without needing the full explanation. Then she did something that caught him off guard. She handed him the book she'd been holding. "Then start now." He stared down at the cover. "You want me to read a romance set on a flower farm? I want you to read something that makes you feel something," she said, already heading toward the register. "Plus, it's got a dog that wears sweaters. You'll like it." He followed her, unsure how the afternoon had shifted so fast. She paid without hesitation, sliding her black card across the counter. Brayden caught the clerk's quick glance at it, recognition, maybe even reverence. Outside, the wind had picked up. Lyla's coat fluttered behind her as they walked. He noticed the way people moved around her on the sidewalk, like she had an invisible barrier of energy they didn't want to cross. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she was just used to it. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they slowed at the corner. She looked over at him. "You just did." "All right," he said, lips twitching. "Can I ask you something else?" "Now you're pushing it," she teased, but her eyes were curious. "Why here? Why that coffee shop?" "You don't exactly blend in." Instead of answering immediately, Lyla turned her face toward the street, watching a cyclist weave between cars. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and said, "Because sometimes I need to feel like I'm not being watched, or expected to be someone specific." "That place lets me breathe," he waited, sensing more. "And you didn't look at me like I was a headline." There it was again, that hint of mystery, the unspoken layers just beneath her surface. He didn't push further, not yet. They reached the edge of the park where Willow's aftercare group was finishing an outdoor activity. Carla, her caretaker during the week, spotted him and waved. Willow ran straight toward him, arms full of leaves and half-crushed acorns. "Look what I found," she shouted, beaming. "This one looks like a baby heart." Brayden laughed and crouched to take the leaf from her hand. "You're right, a tiny, crinkled heart." Lyla stood at a distance watching, a soft expression on her face. Willow turned her attention to her. "Are you coming to dinner?" Brayden blinked. She can if she wants," Willow said, decisive as ever. Lyla crouched to Willow's level. "Only if your dad says it's okay." Willow looked at Brayden as if the answer was obvious. "She's nice and she smells like fancy soap." He rubbed the back of his neck. "We were just heading home." "It's not much, but if you're hungry." Lyla's smile was small, but it reached her eyes. "I'd love to." Brayden didn't miss how she paused before stepping into his apartment. Her gaze swept over the narrow stairwell, the peeling paint, the old framed photo of a beach he'd never been to. She didn't flinch. She didn't comment. Inside, Willow immediately dragged her to the couch to show her a finger-painted masterpiece that had long since dried and curled at the edges. Lyla listened like it was a museum exhibition. Brayden moved through the kitchen, pulling together what he could. Pasta, frozen garlic bread, a bag of mixed vegetables that had survived the week. He hadn't planned to host anyone, let alone someone who probably dined with people who used words like investment leverage over truffle risotto. But if Lyla noticed the worn plates or the flickering overhead light, she didn't say a word. Over dinner, Willow talked nonstop about her teacher, about a dream she had where a bear danced in a tutu, and about how one of the boys in class said he'd marry her someday. Brayden choked on his water at that. Lyla, to her credit, managed to hold in a laugh. After Willow was tucked into bed, her stuffed rabbit snuggled in beside her, Brayden returned to the living room to find Lyla standing near the window, looking out at the city. "Thanks for dinner," she said, her voice quieter now. "I should be thanking you, you brought the book." She turned to him, something unreadable behind her eyes. "You know, you're not what I expected." He leaned against the wall. "I get that a lot." "No," she said, stepping closer, "I mean it. You see people, you listen. Most people don't. You talk like you've been around a lot of people who don't." "I have." Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She didn't check it. Instead, she looked at him and said, "I should go." He nodded, half wishing he could ask her to stay, even though he knew better. At the door, she hesitated. "Lyla," he said before she stepped out, "are you ever going to tell me what you're running from?" She didn't smile. She just looked at him for a long moment and said, "Eventually." Then she was gone, leaving behind the faintest trace of perfume and a storm of questions Brayden didn't know how to answer. But he knew one thing. Whatever this was, whoever she was, it wasn't random, and it was only just beginning. The first time Brayden saw Lyla outside their usual bubble of coffee shops and bookstores, he almost didn't recognize her. It was early evening, the kind of dusky gray that made everything feel like it was holding its breath. He was leaving the garage after a long shift, grease under his nails, smudges on his shirt, and a throbbing ache in his shoulder from lifting a transmission solo when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb across the street. A suited driver stepped around and opened the rear door. Lyla climbed out. Not in a tailored blazer or heels, but in a deep navy dress that shimmered under the city lights, her hair swept back and up, exposing a delicate chain around her neck that looked like it cost more than Brayden's entire apartment. She didn't see him at first. She was too busy nodding at the driver, pulling on a pair of gloves and sliding something into her clutch. He ducked back into the alley before she turned his way. The disconnect hit him like a gut punch. He wasn't part of that world, the one with private cars and evening gowns and men in tuxedos waiting under gold-lit awnings. He was the man who handed over keys with oil-stained hands, who calculated whether a full tank of gas or groceries took priority that week. He waited until the car pulled away, then walked home with his jaw tight and his chest hollow. The next time they met, it was Lyla who found him. She showed up at the park where Willow's group met on Saturdays, handing out juice boxes and supervising sidewalk chalk chaos. Brayden had just finished fixing a broken scooter one of the kids brought in when Lyla appeared on the other side of the fence. "I'm not stalking you," she said before he could speak. "I just asked Willow where she'd be today." He didn't smile, she noticed. "You saw me the other night," she said, stepping closer. "Didn't you? I didn't realize you were headed to a gala." "It wasn't a gala," he raised a brow. "The driver, the dress, the building with a doorman," she didn't flinch, but her voice lowered. "It was a fundraiser. My father hosts them every year." Brayden folded his arms. "Your father, what does he do?" "He doesn't do anything anymore. He's dead." The words landed between them like a dropped brick. Lyla looked away. "He left me the company, I run it now." Brayden blinked. "What company?" "Monroe Capital." He stared at her, the name clicking instantly. The Monroe Foundation signs were on half the city's schools and hospitals. Brayden had fixed a nurse's car last fall who couldn't stop praising the free childcare stipend the foundation offered. "You're the Monroe." "No," she said, looking at him again. "I'm Lyla, the rest is just noise." Brayden sat on the low wall by the playground. "You could have told me. I was going to, but I liked that you didn't care." He exhaled through his nose. "Now I do." She stepped forward, her voice gentler. "Because you think it changes something." "It doesn't," he asked. She didn't answer. A few feet away, Willow shrieked with joy, dragging a boy by the hand toward a chalk mural of a dragon they'd drawn together. Lyla watched her for a moment. "Can I take you both to dinner tonight?" she asked. "I can't afford that kind of place," he said without thinking. "I wasn't asking you to," she replied. Brayden hesitated. "I work late. I'll wait." He looked up at her. "Why?" "Because I didn't lie when I said I liked the company." He wanted to say no. He wanted to push back to protect the fragile wall he'd built around his life, but Willow would be thrilled. And part of him dangerously wanted to know what came next. That night, Lyla picked them up in a quiet gray SUV, the kind that didn't scream money but hummed it under the hood. Willow's eyes lit up when she saw the car was stocked with coloring books and a snack bag that included chocolate-covered pretzels, her favorite. The restaurant wasn't what Brayden expected. It was tucked behind a row of townhouses, with soft lighting and mismatched chairs that felt more home than high society. The hostess greeted Lyla by name but didn't fawn, didn't gush, just smiled and led them to a corner table with a wide banquette. Willow chattered through most of the meal, and Lyla listened like every sentence was a gift. Brayden watched her from across the table, trying to reconcile the woman who could navigate a boardroom with the one now teaching his daughter how to eat rigatoni without wearing half of it. After dessert, a warm berry tart Lyla ordered for the table. Though Willow insisted it was hers, Brayden stepped outside with her while Carla, who had met them at the restaurant, took Willow home for the night. The air was crisp, and the city buzzed in the distance. "You're good with her," Brayden said quietly. "She makes it easy." He looked at her. "You've got people who do this kind of thing for you, drivers, assistants. You could have sent someone." "I didn't want to send someone, I wanted to be here." Brayden searched her face. "Why?" "Because I haven't felt like myself in a long time," she admitted. "And with you with her, I don't feel like I have to perform." For a long moment they stood without speaking, then she said, "I know this is a lot. I know I should have told you earlier." "You didn't owe me anything," he said, "but I don't know what this is." "I don't either," she said, "but I want to find out." He glanced at the ground, then back at her. "I'm not like the people in your world." "Good," she said softly. "They're exhausting." Brayden cracked a faint smile then, small but real. Lyla stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to change," she said. "I'm asking you to let me in." He thought about the bills still sitting on his counter, the second job he'd picked up on weekends, the weight of responsibility that never left his shoulders. But he also thought about how Lyla looked at Willow like she mattered. And how, for the first time in years, someone had looked at him like he mattered too. He nodded once. Lyla reached up, brushing her fingers lightly across his jaw. Then she leaned in and kissed him slow, certain, and completely unguarded. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Brayden stood in the middle of the penthouse, still trying to make sense of the fact that Lyla lived here. He'd been here only once before, briefly, after she insisted on showing him the rooftop view, but tonight felt different. Tonight, it felt like she had invited him into her actual life, not just the curated pieces of it. The floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire wall behind him, revealing a skyline that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not real life. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner, flanked by shelves filled with first-edition books and framed photographs of places he couldn't name. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Lyla said from behind him, her voice softer than usual. He turned. She was barefoot now, her heels discarded at the door. Her hair was down, falling over one shoulder in loose waves that looked nothing like the polished woman who'd first sat at his table. She looked real. "I almost didn't," he admitted. She stepped closer. "Because it's too much. Because it feels like a dream I'm not supposed to wake up in." Lyla didn't reach for him. She didn't crowd the moment. She just stood there, letting the silence settle between them until it felt safe to speak again. "I've been in this place for years," she said. "And it's never felt like home, not once." He glanced around. "You could live anywhere, why stay here?" "Because I didn't know where else to go," she said. "But now, I think I'm starting to figure it out." Brayden searched her face. "Are you saying that because it sounds nice or because you mean it?" "I mean it," she said without hesitation. "You and Willow, you make me want things I stopped believing I could have." He crossed his arms. "Like what?" "A life that feels like mine." She walked to the kitchen, opening a sleek glass-fronted cabinet and pulling out 2 heavy glasses. He followed, watching as she poured water and pushed one across the counter. You're not afraid to tell me when I'm being ridiculous, she said. And you're the only person who's looked me in the eye this year without wanting something from me. I want honesty, Brayden said quietly. That's all I've ever wanted. Then you're going to get it, she said. Starting now, she reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. It was thick. Sealed, this is for Willow, she said. Not from Monroe Capital or the Foundation, from me. Brayden hesitated. What is it? A full scholarship to 3 different private schools, she said. You can pick which one or none, but I wanted you to know, I see her, I see how bright she is. And I want her to have every door open. He stared at the envelope. I'm not trying to buy my way in, she added. I just want to give your daughter what she deserves. Brayden's voice was low. You don't even know what you're giving. She told me she wants to be a doctor, Lyla said. And she drew me a picture of her future hospital. It had pink walls and a rainbow waiting room. That knocked something loose in his chest. I've never known anyone who believed in people the way she does, Lyla continued. And I think she gets that from you. He leaned on the counter, gripping the edge. You're making this hard. I know. She already thinks the world of you. She doesn't know I'm worth billions. That's not why she likes you. She thinks you're magic because you showed her how to fold a paper crane without tearing it. Lyla smiled, but it was tinged with something that looked like longing. I don't want to be a visitor in your life, she said. I want to be part of it. Brayden let that sink in. And if you're not ready, she said, I'll wait. I've waited for a lot of things, but this is the only one that's ever felt worth it. He stepped around the counter. You said the penthouse never felt like home. It didn't, he looked at her. And now her eyes met his. Now it feels like where I want to start something. He didn't say anything. He just reached for her hand and held it. Later that week, Lyla invited them both back, only this time, the space had changed. The cold, echoing rooms had been softened. A second bedroom had been transformed into a reading nook covered in pillows and bookshelves that reached the ceiling. Stuffed animals lined the windowsill, and a blanket with cartoon stars was folded neatly on the bed. I know she still lives with you, Lyla said quickly, but if she ever wants to stay over, I wanted her to have a space that felt like hers. Willow ran straight past them and dove onto the bed, squealing that it was a cloud made of stars. Brayden didn't speak. He just wrapped an arm around Lyla's waist and held her closer. The next few weeks passed in a blur of movement and change, quiet dinners, museum visits, mornings where Lyla helped Willow braid her hair while Brayden packed lunches. Their lives didn't merge perfectly at first. There were moments of tension when Brayden refused a job Lyla tried to offer through one of her business partners, or when Lyla struggled with how to slow herself down and stop trying to fix everything with money. But they worked through it. They grew. One crisp Sunday morning, Brayden surprised her. He took her to the same coffee shop where they first met, the same table, the exact seat she'd taken that first day. She looked at him, amused. What is this? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. She froze. Brayden opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring, no diamonds, no flair, just the kind of ring that felt permanent. I can't give you penthouses or private planes, he said. You already have those, but I can give you this, a life that's real. One that's messy and loud and full of love. Lyla's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, so fiercely it almost looked like a shake. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Willow, sitting nearby with a muffin the size of her face, clapped and shouted, You're going to be my forever person now. Lyla laughed, then pulled Brayden into the most unapologetic, grounding kiss of his life. They didn't have a grand wedding. They didn't need one. Instead, they had a rooftop dinner under the stars, with Willow dancing barefoot on the stone tiles, fairy lights strung overhead, and a cake that Lyla insisted they eat with their hands. Brayden looked around at the life he'd never asked for but somehow ended up with. He had a daughter who believed the moon was following her because it loved her most. He had a woman who saw him not as someone she could fix, but someone she could love. And he had a home not because of where it was, but because of who was in it. He kissed Lyla again, slow and certain, with the city humming below and everything ahead of them still unwritten. And for the first time in years, Brayden Oakes didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Lyla stood alone in the community center's event hall, watching the last of the folding chairs being cleared away. String lights still twinkled above her, casting a soft gold glow over the now empty space. A few hours ago, it had been filled with laughter, music, and the delighted shrieks of children chasing balloons. Willow's 6th birthday party had been everything Lyla wanted it to be: chaotic, joyful, and completely unfiltered. She hadn't hired caterers or planners. No fancy backdrops or stylized cakes, just handmade streamers, pizza boxes stacked high, and Willow's favorite playlist on loop. The kind of celebration Lyla never had growing up, but always dreamed someone might throw for her. And now, she'd thrown it for someone else, someone who had become hers. Brayden appeared in the doorway, carrying a half-inflated unicorn balloon under one arm and a pair of pink light-up sneakers in the other. "She left these under the refreshment table," he said, placing the shoes on a nearby bench. Lyla smiled. "She ran around in socks for half the party. I figured they'd end up somewhere strange." He nodded toward the balloon. "This guy's coming home with us." She named it Kevin. "Apparently he's her new assistant. She's going to make someone a very confused boss one day, or a brilliant one." They stood in easy silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. Outside, the sky had deepened to navy, and a few stars had begun to push through the city haze. Brayden set the balloon down and walked toward her. "She told me something earlier." Lyla tilted her head. "What?" She said she wants to keep having birthdays like this, with people who don't leave. Lyla's throat tightened. "I want that too, I know you do." She reached for his hand. "I used to think permanence was just a word people used to sound comforting, but I'm starting to understand it now." He brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "It's not about staying in one place, it's about choosing the same people over and over." She looked up at him. "Then I'm choosing you." "You already did." When they got back to the penthouse, Carla was waiting with a sleepy Willow curled against her shoulder, already half dreaming. Carla gave them a knowing smile before whispering goodnight and heading down to the guest suite she used whenever Lyla asked her to stay over. Brayden carried Willow to her room, tucking her beneath the soft constellation blanket. Lyla lingered in the doorway, watching him adjust the stuffed rabbit beneath her arm and smooth her hair back without waking her. The tenderness in his touch still stopped her breath. Back in the living room, Lyla poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Brayden as he sank onto the couch beside her. She curled her legs beneath her, leaning into him without hesitation. "I have something to tell you," she said. He turned to her, his brow lifting slightly. "I stepped down this morning." His glass paused halfway to his lips. "From Monroe Capital," she nodded. "I sold my controlling shares, kept a seat on the board, but I don't want to run it anymore." Brayden set his glass down. "You've been running that company since you were, 23? Since 22. But it's never been about the job. It was about survival. I inherited it when I was still grieving, still figuring out who I was without my father's shadow. But lately, I think I've figured it out." He studied her. "What do you want to do?" She smiled slowly. "I want to build something new, not for shareholders, for people." "Like what?" "I'm opening a community program," she said. "After seeing how much places like Willow's school and this center have impacted lives, I want to help expand that. Daycare support, after-school programs, job placement for single parents. I want to make wealth do something that matters." Brayden reached for her face, cupping her cheek. "That's who you are. It's who I want to be with you. You already are." She leaned into him, the kiss that followed slow and deep and full of something quieter than passion, something steadier. Love that had built itself brick by brick, through truth, through trust, and through the decision to stay. Months passed and the seasons shifted. They didn't plan a wedding. They planned a life. Brayden kept working at the garage, but now on his terms. He partnered with a local program that helped train young adults in trade skills, something Lyla had quietly funded behind the scenes, never asking for recognition. Willow started at her new school, the one they'd chosen together, and came home bursting every day with stories about science experiments and the nice lady who brought cupcakes and said she wasn't a queen, just Lyla. One autumn afternoon, Lyla walked into their apartment, now a shared home they'd moved into together, one that blended her warmth with his grounding, and found Brayden in the kitchen teaching Willow how to make pancakes from scratch. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, just watching them. Willow was wearing an apron that reached her ankles, flower on her nose, her eyes lit up with joy. Brayden glanced up, saw her, and smiled. "Hey," he said, "we're experimenting." "With what?" she asked, stepping into the room. "Cinnamon and chaos," he answered. Willow giggled as she cracked an egg too hard, spilling it across the counter. "I told you," Brayden said, grabbing a towel. "Chaos." Lyla kissed him on the cheek as he cleaned up. "This is everything." "It's messy," he said. "Perfectly." Later that night, after Willow had fallen asleep surrounded by pancake-themed drawings, Lyla and Brayden lay in bed, the windows open to the crisp air, the city murmuring far below them. "You know what I've never done?" she asked. He turned toward her. "What?" "Looked forward to forever." He pulled her closer. "Then let's not look, let's just live it." She closed her eyes, her head resting against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchoring her. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. They were already living everything they'd never believed they could have, together, forever.